Welcome to the Life and Leadership Podcast, where we're developing military leaders one question at a time. We're taking a quick break from our senior enlisted interview series for our first special episode. While all conversations in a series are connected by a common narrative thread, our specials are how we fulfill our promise to create conversations that otherwise wouldn't exist. Today, that conversation is with retired Air Force Colonel K.C. Campbell. She's an exceptional leader, world-class fighter pilot, and best-selling author who took a few minutes of her busy time to share her thoughts on how to succeed as a young military officer. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to our special host, Melissa Rushoff.
I'm Melissa Rushoff, the vice chair of this amazing foundation. Here with somebody that I think all of you will want to hear from. If you're not familiar with K.C. Campbell, I've been fortunate enough to know her for about 20 years, while both she, her husband, and now my husband were in the Tiger Sharks and the Flying Tigers out in North Carolina many, many decades ago. But they deployed over to Iraq and Afghanistan. She has a phenomenal story. She's written an amazing book. She is not only a leader in the community, a noted and keynoted speaker, a military spouse herself, a mother, and we are just so honored to have her here to talk about her time as a company grade officer. So welcome, Kim, to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. You make me feel a little bit old. It's been so long. I guess we have known each other that long.
Although we haven't aged, right? But then we have these kids that have aged. So it obviously makes me feel as if we may
Absolutely.
have. Well, Kim, for people not familiar with your military career, can you give us a summary of it? I guess going back to when you first went through the academy and what happened next.
Yeah, absolutely. So I recently retired after 24 years in the Air Force. I started my career at the Air Force Academy. I graduated in 1997. I also finished my career at the Air Force Academy as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development. So kind of fun to come full circle. But I spent a few years at grad school right after graduation on a Marshall Scholarship, and then went off to pilot training and flew the awesome, legendary A-10 for about 20 years. And during that time, obviously had the opportunity to deploy multiple times to combat both Iraq and Afghanistan, but I also got the opportunity to lead teams. I was a squadron commander and group commander. When I was a group commander, I was responsible for about 1,000 people throughout South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, which was really exciting and totally outside my comfort zone as an A-10 pilot, but learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about leadership, and then finished out my career at the Air Force Academy. I taught for a couple of years in the Military and Strategic Studies Department, and then finished out as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development. So life came full circle. It's where I met my husband. It's a way to close out and give back to this next generation of leaders, which has been really exciting for me.
And what are you doing now?
Now I am a keynote speaker. I work for a company called Victory Strategies, and we do leadership development work. So I kind of continued a passion that I had at the end of my career. You know, I think for so long we find passion and purpose in what we do in the military. For me, that was flying A-10s and supporting our ground troops. And then as I progressed in my career and eventually stopped flying the A-10, I had to find this new passion, a new purpose. And I really found that in developing a new generation of leaders. And so when I retired, I'm lucky enough to continue that passion and purpose. So we do leadership development work, executive coaching, and I spend most of my time giving keynote speeches to various teams and organizations throughout the country, and a few little trips outside the country as well.
And you're also a best-selling author.
Yeah, who would have thought I never thought I would be an author, was not on the list, didn't even really know that I could write a book. I realized throughout my career, the number of people that shared stories with me and shared lessons that they learned, shared some really hard things that they went through that really helped me in my career and on my path. And so I felt a little bit of a responsibility to do the same, to share some of those stories and the lessons from flying, from leadership, to hopefully help others on their leadership journey as well.
So that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is, what one lesson would you say you learned when you were a company grade officer that maybe you could pass along to others that are right now in that position?
Yeah, there were many, I'll say that. But I think the reality is, I showed up as a captain to my first fighter squadron. So I spent my time as a lieutenant at grad school. And so I'm showing up to my fighter squadron, a young captain. And, usually when you show up new to a squadron, there's, a lieutenant's association. I really should have been part of that being, in terms of it being my first assignment. But I got some of the honorable duties of serving as the snacko, chief coffee maker or popcorn maker. And I think, some of those can feel like not my favorite job that I've ever done. But the reminder is that no matter what job you're given, even if it's snacko or coffee, whatever it is, like go out and do it well. Because I think people are always watching to see how you'll respond when you're given a task. Are you doing it to the best of your ability? Do you take pride in it? I mean, I think it's like, you see even like our janitors in the buildings and things like that. Like, how are they doing? Some of them take such intense pride in what they do, and the idea is that we connect with them and say thank you for what they do. But it's this idea that no matter what job you have, you take pride in it. You do it to the best of your ability because people are watching and they're looking to see how you can do those small tasks. Because why give you a bigger task if you can't take care of the little things as well?
Yeah, and attitude seems to be everything. It's
Absolutely.
interesting. General Breedlove said a similar piece of advice. He said, "Bloom where you're planted,"
Yeah.
which is really that's pretty phenomenal to have two amazing leaders that have a similar advice for CGOs. Let me ask
Probably
you a little.
because I was just going to say it's probably because we both experienced some jobs in our Air Force careers that may not have been our first choice, and things that maybe we didn't want to do. I can think of some very clearly in my path that happened even later in my career. And I was a little angry and upset and frustrated at first, but I realized like I'm there, I've got the job, I might as well do the best that I can and try to have a good attitude. But sometimes it's harder than we think. And it's just, being mindful of it and doing the best you can.
Yeah, I love that. I love your transparency with that because you're right. A lot of times we're given opportunities or challenges,
Yes.
however you choose to view them, that are not what you anticipated. And so then what do you do with that, right? That's your choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask a different version of that question. What advice would you give your younger self? So, not necessarily as a CGO or in that specific capacity or with that title, but just the younger version of Kim Campbell that you now, and you are young, but now, a little bit later in
Yeah.
life, wish you would have known back then.
Yeah, more experience now. I think I would tell myself to not be so hard on myself. I think I really wanted to do well and to perform well. And, I think about walking into my first fighter squadron on day one. I think about being the only woman and the amount of pressure that I put on myself. And, I walked into that squadron and I felt like if I made a mistake or if I failed or did anything wrong that I would ruin it for the women that followed me, which is just a ton of pressure. The reality is like anytime you're new to an organization or a unit, people are watching. I mean, whether you're a man or a woman, like it doesn't matter. You need to go do the best that you can. But the reality is we are going to make mistakes. We are going to have failures along the way. And the most important thing is that you learn from them. I mean, I think people are also watching that, right? If you make a mistake, can you get back up again? Can you learn from it, not do it again? But I think we put a ton of pressure on ourselves and we feel like we have to be perfect. And that can really spiral out of control if you let it. And I think it's just a reminder like, hey, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to face rejection. You're going to fail at some point. So can you get back up again? Can you dust yourself off, give it another go, kind of get back into the fight, and not be so hard on yourself and give yourself some grace when it happens.
Absolutely. And that's great advice for the younger generation, period. Whether it's our children, whether it's CGOs, whether it's somebody out in the business world. So, my next question was going to be what is the most valuable lesson you learned during your time in uniform? Would you say that would be it? Or would it be something different?
I think it may be a little bit different. I think um, it's so hard to pick one because I feel like there's so many lessons, but I will give you one. And I really think that it's really all about the team, right? For me, looking back at my career, the times where I guess I faced the most challenges that were some of the lowest times in my life, I realized that the reason I got through those was because I had people by my side that were helping me through it. I think of little things like, not even that little, right? But basic training. That was so hard. It was like this shocker to the system of like, what did I get myself into? And yet I have these awesome classmates and teammates who just kind of, we propel each other through. We get each other through the hard times. I think about those early deployments, in 2002, 2003, back to back from Afghanistan and Iraq. There were some tough living conditions. There were some, it's tough being away from home. And yet, like, the guys in my squadron were my brothers, and I look back on that time with such fondness because of them. I think about flying a heavily damaged airplane back to base, after a really difficult mission in Iraq. And the reason I was successful and made it home was because I had this incredible wingman by my side. I had these amazing F-15s overhead providing support. I had rescue helicopters on alert, in case I had to eject, and not that I wanted them. The crash recovery team was, everybody was there waiting for me and had my back. And I think that's really the thing, is like, it is about the team. You don't do it alone, even as a leader. And when you're in charge of a team, whether it's a small team or a large team, yes, you're the leader, you're the commander, but your team is the one that determines, success or failure in your mission, in your role. And so I think it's just a reminder that, it's the people, it's the connections. It goes outside the military as well. It goes outside, with your family. It's the connections that you make. It's the trust that you build. It is about the team, and it's not about you.
Yes. And I have seen you are such a good teammate and team member. I know Jason said that back from the time that you guys were deployed together, and I saw it throughout your entire career. You're very humble, but you are well known throughout the entire military as being such a good leader and such a good teammate. And sometimes you don't have both of those. You might have a good leader that doesn't see that team mentality, or you might have somebody that has that team mentality, but isn't necessarily the best in a leadership role. And you really beautifully do both of those. And I've seen it just as a military spouse and just having known you. So thank you for being that example, not just to women in the military, but to the military community at large.
Well, thank you. I didn't always get it right. I learned some lessons the hard way, and thankfully, sometimes my young airmen were the ones to point those things out. But it's this idea that you're constantly learning and growing, and you may have a vision of how you think you should be as a leader, or how you want to be, but you're never gonna get it right all the time. And so it's constantly learning from others and listening, especially early on in any leadership role, to learn from your team, to listen to them. I mentioned about my role as a group commander. I was a fighter pilot as a group commander, and yet my airmen were civil engineers, they were lawyers, they were doctors, they were logisticians, firefighters, you name it. I wasn't an expert there. They were the experts. And so I really took the time to learn from them, let them teach me what they do, so then I can advocate for them. And so it is a lot about listening and learning. And when you don't get it right, you try again and do something different.
Yeah. And the military really, I learned early on, it's not a job or even a career, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I've seen that team mentality. Okay. So last question. Do you have any advice that you want to share with the next generation of leaders that maybe you haven't already shared with us?
I guess my advice will be that you will get a lot of advice throughout your career. We certainly did. My husband also active duty, and we got a lot of advice. Sometimes it wasn't always great advice. I think it was always well-intentioned. But the reality is you have to choose your own path, and you have to define what success looks like for you, because I think other people might define a view of success, what your perfect career path should be. And the reality is, especially with a dual military marriage, I think anytime you have another spouse that's working, quite honestly, anytime, right? When you have a family, especially, sometimes that perfect career path in someone else's eyes isn't really the right path for you and your family. And it really, we had lot of people give us advice, and in the end, you choose the path that's right for you, and figure out what that is, because you're going to get a ton of advice. So that's first. I'm going to give a little bit more. But because as I give advice, I'm just telling you, you take it and make it for what it is. But I think something that, it's for me, I've retired now. I've been retired now for, almost, I guess, 4 years. And I think, I've had some time to reflect. I think writing a book helped me reflect, but I look back on my journey and I look back on, different leadership roles and different experiences I've had. And the reality is that there were so many times in those experiences that I felt doubt or worry about being able to perform or meet expectations. There was just some nervousness about what I was going to do. Also, a lot of excitement, right? And I think just the thing to remember is that we will face doubt and fear and worry about our path and our career ahead. It is all about what you do with that doubt, that worry. Put in the work, be good at what you do. That's the most important thing you can do, especially as a young CGO. I felt like that time in my life was my time to be an expert, to absolutely put in the work. And it is about being good at what you do. It is about putting in the work. It's about having a good attitude so that you can overcome that doubt, worry, and fear about what comes next. But don't let it paralyze you. You've got to be able to do something with it. Nobody's perfect. You will make mistakes. You will fail on this journey of yours. But in the end, those hard things that we go through, I think those are the things where we learn the most about ourselves as leaders, about ourselves as teammates as well.
Absolutely. We don't learn much from our successes. We learn from our failures.
Absolutely.
And do you want to tell everyone the name of your book?
Sure. It is Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leading with courage. And I really tried to focus on the key lessons throughout my experience and my time in service. Some of them, as I mentioned, learn the hard way, right? There's some successes, there's some failures, there's mistakes, there's challenges, but there's also opportunities. So sharing the lessons that, people shared with me on my journey, but lessons also that I think are just applicable to leaders. And I use leaders broadly. I think it's for if you're leading a large organization, a small team, your family, or even yourself, because I think we all have a role as leaders. And if we want to grow and improve, then we have to continuously be learning, listening from others, whether it's podcasts, books, media, you name it. But, get ideas about what you want to do. Learn from others, try new things, and don't be afraid to fail. It'll be okay.
Take the good and let go of the bad.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
you've been such a great role model in that. So thank you. And thank you for taking time in the midst of a busy schedule, because as many of you know, Kim does not only do these leadership summits and symposiums, is a keynote speaker, as I said, best-selling author, but she's also in the midst of all of that, still raising 2 boys. Her husband's working full-time as well. And so she took the time out of her travel schedule, her work schedule, her family schedule to offer us this piece of advice. And we're just so incredibly grateful. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.